of the comments in my early reviews is how the theme, the atmosphere, the feeling of grief is either well thought out or is just really there in the Ordinary Bruja. And and I'm like, yeah, I've known grief for as long as I can remember. Um, I think I was very little when I went to my first funeral. And it has to do because I was raised by my grandmother, someone that was born in 1921 or 1922. And she's the mother figure that I know. That's who I call Mama. And it's so weird to explain this because to me it's just so natural. It's how I know life. But now looking at it, and understanding that it may be a little different or quite different than how other people who were raised and who know their childhood with their parents who are of the normal quote unquote parental age, right? 30s or 40s and stuff like that. That me having a parent that was in her 70s, it's not the norm, right? And but that's how I grew up and that's all that I know. So for me that was my normal. And my normal was going to funerals with her, doing las novenas, the 9 days of mourning, doing the prayers, having people outwardly being very sad, me feeling all those emotions, which are very intense as a child, and kind of colliding with them and sometimes being feeling that myself because when you're surrounded by emotions like that, it's almost like tú estás empapada, like you are drowning in them as well, because it's just, if the water is surrounding you, I mean, you can't help but being touched by it. And that's how it is. So, and I will never forget seeing my first dead body at a funeral. I still remember it to this day. It was a relative, old relative of us, of my grandmother, and he had this plum purple suit. This is in the Dominican Republic back in the day, where mortuary affairs and particulars, right, weren't really like what we know now. So he was coated in baby powder. So it was like this mixture of decomposing body and baby powder. And then he had cotton stuffed in his mouth that was a little bit agaped, and up his nose as well, right? But his eyes were cleanly shut, so that was the one thing that was not like slightly open in the bit. And he was so still, like he just looked so heavy laying there, and I will never forget this. That people were just like mourning him, around him and stuff like that. And I remember peeking over the casket and being very close to it and just like smelling and seeing all these things. And like, as you can see, I saw this when I was very young and I have very little memories of my childhood, but of this I have. And I remember seeing, a dead body that fell on the street as well, because we live in una carretera, kind of like this makeshift highway in the Dominican Republic, and it's just the thump of a body that just has very little movement to it, on the street. So it's like all these images, I've seen machetes and people fighting so it's a lot of things that I have experienced and seen as a kid that now I realize that that was not the norm to experience at such early ages. And maybe that's why I write the way that I write. And that's why I write what I write. Uh, because of that, because it's kind of like my way of processing all those things that I say I don't have memory of, but in a way they come out in my writing. I have mourned the deaths of family members, people that are close to me, friends, pets, you name it. I have mourned the loss of friendships, the loss of relationships. I have lost and mourned so many things, the death of my sanity at many points in my life, death of my freedom when I embark on certain choices and responsibilities. And all these things I kind of look at and reflect quite a lot about it. So when people say, wow, she writes grief really well, well, yeah, because I'm very familiar with it. Has become part of me, second nature, to the point where I thought that that's what life is all about. It's just a lot of grieving. And I think that's why, like, I had this fear where, like, when I felt intense happiness or joy, I will be like, for sure, grief will be the next thing that I feel because it has always been that way, that it's like I feel immense joy and then sure enough, boom, here comes grief. Because I was bound to lose something and then just grief about it. Feel that loss. And I feel things very deeply. Just like I feel intense and immense joy, I also feel the lows very deeply. And thankfully, I have always had like healthy coping mechanisms. But mourning has been just a normal part of me since I can remember. And I just always thought that it was like that for everybody. And now I realize that there are people that have lived life barely touched by loss or just recently touched by loss, and I wonder sometimes how it will be to have lived so joyful for also many consecutive years without having to feel any kind of those lows, because I think we all feel lows, but the low of losing something or someone or some sense of coming out of a normalcy, because that's also a loss. I think that hits different. So I always wonder how it is to be in a life where you can go on for so long, for years of your life, and not being touched by loss. I'm almost a little envious of it, but then I'm not, because then I remember how it is, that first loss, and how deep I felt that I wouldn't wish that on anybody, especially, later in the game. I've at least, and it doesn't get any easier. And I'm not going to say like I've become accustomed to it, but at least I know what to expect. And therefore I can react to it a little bit better. Um, but at first, like losing and grieving something was just like this deep hole that I had to carry myself out. And it took so long to carry myself out of it that it just felt as if I was suffocating and I was being buried alive along with the person that I lost or the thing that I lost. And that's how it felt, like this sense that I couldn't breathe any longer. And in that first time feeling that, it's so disorienting. It's like you don't know which way to go. You don't know where to look. You don't know what to think. You don't know how life is gonna be after that moment. And that's why I say it's so disorienting to be in that moment and to feel it at the beginning. But having felt it for so many times, now I understand the waves of those emotions as I experience it in my body and in my mind. And I don't become erratic, or I don't become like overly obsessed with the feelings themselves, the emotions themselves, and I don't wonder for too long, like, am I gonna be okay? Because now I know the answer to that, that I am. That I've gone through this before. I will go through this again. And all I need to do is just hold on as the waves carry me, and eventually they'll carry me to shore. And but I know that now after going through that so many times. At the beginning, it was kind of hard to conceptualize that and to have faith in allowing the emotions to just be, and for me to feel it and then just write them out as best as I could, while maintaining as best as I could a positive outlook, a more realistic outlook, I should say, because at some points in the grieving process, it's nothing really positive that I could think of, right? It's nothing really positive there. And I just had to keep it real and then just choose the more realistic uh, perception or viewpoint, per se. But yeah, but that's why I tend to write grief so well.